imagine having a power plant in the middle of a city underground and, under a park or under like a shopping center. When you talk about things like wind and solar, for example,
Right.
there are only certain parts of the country that can do wind and solar. So then you end up having hundreds of miles of transfer of wires that have to carry that energy from a wind farm or a solar farm. A lot of it's lost and it's easily disruptible as well. So being able to have the energy source right where it's needed has incredible efficiencies on a number of facets.
If you like our show and want to learn more, please visit our website at peakwellnesshealth.com, which is linked in the show notes below, where you can gain access to a very simple 10-day body reset program that teaches you about diet, sleep, meditation, exercise, and guides you on how to lower blood sugar, lower blood pressure, lower body fat, and improve your biomarkers all in just 10 days. Additionally, you can find a body optimization program, which teaches you how to lose fat and build muscle. You can also find a link to schedule a one-on-one consultation with me. Welcome to Peak Health with Dr. Gupta, where we discuss optimizing your health and maximizing your genetic potential. We need access to electrical energy to function in today's society, but the unsustainability of fossil fuels is becoming increasingly obvious. The pollutants produced by fossil fuels pose significant health risks to us and our surroundings. Climate change amplifies weather fluctuations, resulting in extreme events such as storms, heat waves, and droughts, which directly impact our physical and mental well-being. Moreover, shifting weather patterns can disrupt ecosystems, affecting agricultural productivity, increasing the prevalence of vector-borne diseases, and compromising our access to fresh water sources, exacerbating water scarcity issues. While renewable energy sources like solar and wind power have made strides in offering cleaner alternatives, there exists another potential game changer, nuclear fusion. This groundbreaking technology holds the promise of unlimited access to clean and abundant energy, which is better for us and the planet. To shed light on this fascinating subject, I'm joined today by my friend Amit Singh. Amit is the CEO of NearStar Fusion. He received his BS in electrical engineering at the University of Virginia and worked at NASA Goddard Space Flight Center and is well-versed in space technologies, intelligence, missile defense, and directed energy. Welcome, Amit.
Thank you, Ravi. Great to see you again.
Absolutely. Really happy to have you on this podcast. Excited for it. Maybe we start off by you just telling us a bit about yourself and how you came to the position of CEO of NearStar Fusion.
Yeah, it was kind of a different journey than most people who work in fusion. I was actually working in the intelligence community for about 25 years. And during that time, I started a company and ended up selling it to private equity. But one thing you realize when you're in intelligence, for as long as I was, is that most of the world's conflicts are based on the scarcity of resources, primarily energy. And you can see that even playing out today in Russia and Ukraine. And, I really wanted to play a role in green and clean energy, and specifically in fusion, because for all the reasons you just mentioned. And I was very fortunate that I had a friend that knew one of the founders of a fusion company in Chantilly, Virginia. And we met and we hit it off, and I quickly became enamored with their approach. There are only about 35 fusion companies in the world right now. So having one in Virginia worked out really well for me. And they really wanted me to bring my business expertise and let them focus on what they're good at, which is the science. And so I get to come in and do what I enjoy, and they get to do what they enjoy. So it's a nice team.
Yeah, well, that's wonderful. It's great to hear that you're care and focused about environmental sustainability, because that's so important for all of us in so many ways, not only for our own personal health, but for the health of the planet and the health of our kids. And it's a huge passion of mine as well. Let's start with talking about what nuclear fusion is. Like, what is nuclear fusion? How does it differ from nuclear fission?
Oh, yeah. Well, fusion is actually what powers the sun. It's the act of combining two atoms together. And which is pretty much the exact opposite of nuclear fission, which is the act of splitting atoms apart. So when you're dealing with fission, and because you're splitting atoms, you have to use very heavy elements. So when you look at the periodic table, you're using things like uranium and plutonium. and they're very radioactive. So they have a lot of, other health risks associated with those fuels. Fusion, on the other hand, has to use very light elements. So things like hydrogen, and hydrogen is not radioactive on its own, but it's very abundant. We have over 1 million years worth of hydrogen fuel right here on Earth for our current energy needs. And so what's nice about it is that when you combine two hydrogen atoms together and you create a helium, it's E equals MC squared, both on the fission side and on the fusion side. But the nice thing about fusion is that it releases 4 times the amount of energy that fission does. So if you had a kilogram of deuterium fuel, which is basically an isotope of hydrogen, versus uranium, you'll get 4 times the amount of energy out of fusion than you would out of fission. And the nice thing about it is that afterwards, you don't have the nuclear waste that you have on the fission side. Just to clarify, there's a isotope of hydrogen called tritium, which is very slightly radioactive, but you can literally put it in your pocket. It can't even break your skin. And literally, it's got a half-life of 12 years. And if you put it into a barrel in a storage unit, after 20 years, you'll have helium, which is valuable in its own right for space exploration and so.
Interesting. Okay. And where do you get this fuel from?
You can literally crack it out of any body of water, the ocean, a lake, a river, even, you're probably drinking some bottled water. Literally a can of water has enough fusion energy in it to power a house for 3 days. So you just literally crack it out of the water. It's a pretty well-known process to do that.
Excellent. And then would it eventually cause water shortages at some point? I mean, are you using that much water for?
No. No, not. Because you're just pulling out the deuterium out of the water. So deuterium is 1/6000th it's typically 1 out of 6,000 particles in water. So yeah, no, we're not going to run out of water.
Okay. All right. It's like you're not going to drain the oceans.
No.
Okay. So now I know that there was the limiting step was technology over many years. And we've seen an exponential increase in technology. In fact, I was listening to a very interesting podcast where the gentleman was saying that from 1900 to 2000, we've seen in exponential growth in technology, but we saw that same growth from 2000 to 2016 or 17. So basically we squeeze 100 years in that period, and we're going to squeeze another 100 years in 17 to 23. So it's like, we are seeing this rapid increase in technology. And as we were talking before this podcast, you mentioned that fusion's been around for a while. We've been thinking about fusion for a while, but tell us about the technology needed and how it's ramped up over the years.
Yes. So you're right. I mean, humans have been doing fusion since the early 1950s. And so we know how to do fusion. The hard part is how do you sustain fusion, and how do you get more energy out than you put in? And that happened for the first time last year at the NIF ignition facility, where they got more energy out than they put in. Now, they did it for a very short amount of time, but it was a huge breakthrough. A lot of the advances in technology, specifically around superconducting magnets, has really pushed the science of fusion forward. Now, and also compute power. Like basically what you were referring to earlier was Moore's law, like how we're doubling every several years our ability to compute and run simulations. Because in fusion, we use something called plasma, which is the 4th state of matter, which I didn't learn when I was in elementary school, but apparently they learn now. So, but plasma is very unpredictable and hard to control. And so being able to run models and simulations is extremely important, because you can't build a reactor around a guess. And so the compute power of these very complex simulations has made it possible where now we can run these models and try ideas in a much more efficient way than we could ever before. And, in the world of fusion, like I said earlier, there are about 35 companies, which equates to roughly 35 different approaches to fusion, and they fall into different camps. Some are using lasers, some are using superconducting magnets. NearStar Fusion actually is using hypervelocity plasma guns, which is a little bit different than what other people are doing. but I won't bore you with those details right now. But yeah, so those advances in technology have really kind of started showing the light at the end of the tunnel. And we have also improvements in diagnostics, because in some cases people have achieved fusion, but they didn't know about it for years later. And so being able to have great diagnostics and, hyper great cameras and other sensors has also helped the technology move forward.
Interesting. Okay. So, and just getting a little bit deeper into the engineering sides of it,
Sure.
because this is so fascinating to me. Yeah. I know. And geeking out a little bit, maybe. So you mentioned lasers, you mentioned magnets. So what I'm imagining is like a fusion reaction, you're basically creating, as you mentioned, same reaction that we see in stars, nuclear fusion in a contained space. So basically it's like I imagine like this ball of energy, and you're extracting some heat from that. Is that in essence what's happening? You're containing this reaction in a small space and you're extracting heat?
Yeah. So even in this space, there's a couple different variants. The most traditional approach right now is basically what you said. They have a ball of plasma that they contain in a reactor called a tokamak. Excuse me. And they have to use the magnets to kind of maintain that plasma, and it's giving off tremendous amounts of heat, which then you can use to boil water and turn a turbine, right? But that's called magnetic confinement. There's another kind of school of thought on fusion, which is called inertial confinement, which is instead of trying to maintain this very, this ball of plasma, which has a lot of, complications to it, we're going to sacrifice the huge gain that you get out of that to do what's a much smaller explosion, or ignition. And so you use like literally milligrams of fuel, and you create a little miniature ignition that lasts microseconds. And if you do it right, depending on the kind of fuel you're using, you might create tremendous amounts of heat, which is, you understand that thermal conversion, but you can also create charged particles. So you don't even need a turbine. You don't even need to boil water. You can literally go to a coil of wire and put it, you have electricity coming off of this reaction. So that's when you get into more advanced fusion fuels. But that's what kind of makes it exciting, is that imagine having a power plant literally under a shopping center, and you don't have to worry about this really expensive and heavy equipment to put energy on the grid. Yeah.
But that's the future of this. That's the potential.
That's what we are hoping for. I mean, one of the things that we've been very excited by is that the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission 2 months ago made a ruling that they were going to regulate fusion differently than fission, and that basically it's called Part 30, and that they were essentially going to regulate fusion like a nuclear medicine facility, like where you get your x-rays or your CT scans. And so imagine having a power plant in the middle of a city underground, and under a park or under like a shopping center.
Yeah.
And then that microgrid infrastructure is also really good for a lot of other reasons, because a lot of energy is lost. When you talk about things like wind and solar, for example,
right,
there are only certain parts of the country that can do wind and solar. So then you end up having hundreds of miles of wires that have to carry that energy from a wind farm or a solar farm. A lot of it's lost, and it's easily disruptible as well. So being able to have the energy source right where it's needed has incredible efficiencies on a number of facets.
Are you struggling with reaching your health goals? Do you feel like you need extra help to achieve your desired level of wellness? Well, we're here to tell you that you're not alone. Our website at peakwellnesshealth.com, which is linked in the show notes below, offers a variety of resources to help you on your journey towards optimal health. One of the most popular resources is the 10-day body reset course, which is designed to teach you about diet, sleep, meditation, exercise, and how to lower your blood sugar, blood pressure, body fat, and improve your biomarkers all in just 10 days. Our program is comprehensive yet easy to follow, and we've seen amazing results for those who have completed it. But that's not all. We offer a body optimization course, which teaches you how to lose fat and build muscle. Our program is tailored towards your individual needs and goals so that you can be sure that you're getting the most effective guidance. And if you need even more personalized support, we offer one-on-one consultations. During these sessions, we'll work with you to create a personalized plan that takes into account your unique circumstances, preferences, and goals. Visit peakwellnesshealth.com today and take the first step towards achieving your health goals. You spoke a bit about this, the safety of it. Now you mentioned that, the potential is to put it in places where there are many people. What about emissions, radioactive emissions, any byproducts of this process that could potentially be harmful? What about explosions? What about all that kind of stuff?
Right. So, unfortunately, we're seeing in Ukraine right now with, they're always on edge about that nuclear power plant, having a meltdown, much like Fukushima or Chernobyl. And the difference there is that fission naturally wants to chain react. So that's one of the dangers. That's why people like to keep nuclear fission plants away from cities. Fusion inherently does not chain react. So if you don't have the perfect conditions for fusion, it immediately stops. So, if that power plant in Ukraine was a fusion power plant and the Russians bombed it, it would never explode and cause damage to the area. It would just stop creating energy. So it's extremely safe. And one of the byproducts of fusion is something called tritium. And tritium is just another isotope of hydrogen. It's very slightly radioactive. I literally carry it around in my pocket at conferences and the like. I don't recommend it, but you could drink it, and it has a half-life of 12 years. So you could put it into a barrel, and 20 years later, you'll have a barrel of helium. So, it's very safe. You can put it in just, any storage place that you have in the city or outside the city. Whereas with fission, the radioactive waste, we only have 3 sites in the entire country that can store nuclear waste from a fission plant.
Okay, Amit, so what about implementation of these fusion plants? Because I imagine it is quite expensive to build something like this.
Mm-hmm.
How much does it cost? How do you see this unfolding in the future?
Right. Depending on the design of fusion reactor you have, the cost could be very, very high. One of the issues that we have to tackle in the fusion community is it's one thing to have net gain fusion, but it's a kind of a separate thing to make it commercially viable. And, permits take a long time to build power plants, but depending on the design of the fusion reactor, like the one that we're building in NearStar, for example, has the ability to retrofit existing hydrocarbon plants, like a coal plant. So, which already has the permits, already has a lot of the power grid infrastructure. And we literally remove the boiler out of a coal plant and place a fusion reactor in there instead, and reuse the turbines, reuse the transformers, and voila. And what's really important about that situation is that in a lot of parts of our country where coal power plants have been shut down, those areas have become very distressed economically, and it's caused a major spike in the opioid crises in those areas. And so there's a lot of desire to bring good jobs back to those areas and upskilling the people so that they don't have to, deal with the tragedies of opioid usage and other things that come along with that. But but getting back to your other question, I want to make it very clear. Fusion is hard. And while the joke used to be that fusion is 30 years away and always will be, I would honestly tell you now, when you're talking to insiders in fusion, they will tell you it's more like 10 years away. And there are companies who, because of those advances we spoke of earlier, we're getting there. But the next step will be like getting it on the grid. And the ability to retrofit existing power plants, and then with the NRC ruling, being able to build power plants in cities, it will be really exciting. And hopefully we'll get it done as quickly as possible.
Wow, that's amazing. So in 10 years, how do you see this unfolding? Like, are you saying in 10 years that the technology will be there to produce mass quantities of energy, that it will take another, however many years to implement that technology into these different, or retrofit that into different power plants?
So I think there will be a lot of incentives given by the government to once there's a net energy gain created. So a lot, much like the incentives they provided for wind and solar, I think they will do similar, they'll create similar strategies for fusion because it's such a desirable energy source. And, frankly, we're in a race against a couple other countries to try to develop it first because we want to maintain our influence around the world and whatnot. So I think they'll kind of remove some of the barriers to entry once we have the science figured out. And one of the things we've seen is that for decades, fusion was pretty much solely funded by the government, Department of Energy, ARPA, NASA, things like that. And now in the last several years, there have been billions of dollars that have come into fusion through private investors. And while most of that investment has gone to a handful of companies, there's a lot of interest in fusion now from the private sector. So I do believe that once the science is figured out and the mobilizing private equity and government forces will make this happen sooner than some of the naysayers will tell you.
Interesting. What about micro plants? We spoke a little bit about this when you talked about, going to their malls, but what about in houses? Can this technology be advanced enough so you could put this in a house?
Most of the companies that are going after fusion are trying to put it on the power grid. There is one company I'm aware of that is trying to create what's called a tabletop reactor that could go perhaps in a home or a building. And, we're excited about what they'll be able to do. They're very well funded. So, but, most people, just the physics of fusion, they're kind of going a little bit bigger. But, the fact of the matter is no one knows which method is going to work. And a lot of people believe that there will be probably 2 or 3 different methods that will work eventually. Yeah. So hopefully a tabletop or, a smaller version will work as well. And we'll have a reactor in our neighborhood or in our backyard.
Yeah. In our backpack, we just carry around.
Yeah. Maybe if you go to Iron Man level. Yeah.
That's amazing. I mean, it's just so fascinating to hear about this stuff. So now you mentioned that you guys have the plasma gun technology. That's what you're focused on? Just describe that a little bit to us. What is that exactly?
Right. So we use a hypervelocity plasma railgun. And so a lot of people, when they think of railguns, they think of weapons and the like. But basically what a plasma railgun can do is shoot projectiles at hypervelocity. Ours, we're gunning for roughly 6 miles per second. So for those of you who lived in DC, you heard the sonic boom this past weekend. Yeah. Imagine that times 30, right? So it's so hypervelocity. We're shooting something about the size of a soda can. And in our scenario, what we do is we shoot it into a magnetic field. And without getting into all the science now, if you create a strong enough magnetic field, and as the canister of fuel goes into it, it gets crushed. And so if you design that can properly, when it gets crushed, it ignites a fusion reaction. If you don't design it properly, the plasma will ooze out of the sides. But once that ignition happens, what we have to do is now capture that heat. So in one of our reactor designs, we have a shower of molten salt that can absorb that heat, and then like a radiator, heat up the water, which turns the turbines, and then you got the energy on the grid from that point forward. So being able to create hypervelocity plasma guns is extremely hard. Very few people in the world can do that. Luckily, we have those people. And luckily, because of the advances in compute technology, we're able to run simulations and models to kind of calculate the design of the capsule, the exact speed that we want the capsule to go at, the strength of the magnet, all those things that we couldn't feasibly do 20 years ago, we can do today. So yes, it's extremely exciting, and invite you to come over to our office in Chantilly. We'll shoot some plasma guns together. It's always a fun time.
I'll take you up on that. That sounds phenomenal. I will be there. And shooting plasma guns is something I never thought I would ever do, but that's the opportunity.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, this was incredibly fascinating. I'm so hopeful that this technology is going to come to fruition, as soon as possible, because it's needed. I mean, we absolutely need it. And, as we discussed earlier, I think it was prior to this podcast, we just can't generate enough renewable sources the way they are currently to power the grid. Maybe you can speak about that, as we close.
Right. I mean, the electricity market worldwide is $2.6 trillion. I mean, that with the T. So, and it's growing because, industry and transportation going electrified. So, most people are now looking at electric cars, but even industry is moving towards electrification for a variety of reasons. When you couple that with a lot of developing nations like India and China, as their economies evolve and they start consuming more energy, wind and solar just cannot keep up with the pace. Now, nothing against wind and solar, they're fantastic technologies, but the demand is going to go up, and we cannot keep up with it with the traditional renewables.
Plus there's, it's dependent on sunlight and wind, which are variable. So you're not going to have consistent power unless you create battery sources and things like that. So there's issues.
Right. I was looking at a chart the other day for the state of New York, and they get more energy from hydroelectric dams than they do from solar, because geographically solar doesn't make a lot of sense for them.
Right.
So, and there's a little bit of a backlash going towards some renewables because people don't want these wind farms and solar farms in their backyards anymore.
Right.
And so there's starting to be some pushback there. I mean, they'll manage for now, but yes, fusion has to be the future, because the issues with fission, while they're getting better, people, they don't feel safe with the nuclear fission reactor in their backyard, right?
Yeah, it's very concerning. And last question, AI, how is that playing a role in the fusion process?
It will. For us right now, it's not, because our PhD students are all kind of, they're our brains right now. But AI, it's just, right now for us to introduce AI would be more of a complication than it would. But we do know that there are some companies that are introducing AI into their models. And yeah, it's very exciting. And I think it will play a part, especially as we start refining the algorithms.
Yes. Well, Amit, this was amazing. I really appreciate your time and sharing all this information with us. If somebody's interested in learning more about fusion, or maybe even getting in contact with you, how would they do so?
You can reach me at amit@nearstarfusion.com. And I would love to have a chat with you and point you to multiple resources that, if you want to just learn. There's actually a great class going on right now online, so I can point you to that too.
How do you get access to that class?
I'll have to send you the link, but
we'll put it in the show notes. We'll put the link.
Okay, that'd be great. Yeah. Sorry.
Awesome, Amit. Well, this was great.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. It was great seeing you again, Ravi.
Absolutely. You too.
All right. Take care.
I hope you enjoyed this podcast. And if you did, please make sure to hit the subscribe and the like button and leave a comment about what you'd like to see on our future episodes. Just a reminder that this podcast is for educational purposes only. It does not substitute for professional care, nor does it constitute medical or other professional advice or services. If you're looking for medical care, please seek a qualified doctor or medical professional. For more information, or if you'd like to check out our programs, please visit our website, peakwellnesshealth.com. That's peakwellnesshealth.com.